Hello and good evening. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. My name is Andrea Picard, and on behalf of TIFF Cinematheque, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of our Chantal Akerman retrospective, News from Home. Now, the retrospective is quite large. We try to get as many films as we can, so it's quite comprehensive, and it's on until December 14th. And I know that many of you are drawn to the iconic work because they're so influential and brilliant, but we also spent a lot of time researching the rare work, the television work, the short films, which are just as insightful and brilliant. So please try to see the rarities as well. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are very grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. On behalf of TIFF, I would like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, and TIFF Cinematheque's public supporters, Ontario Creates and the Canada Council for the Arts. Thanks as well to Classic FM Radio and Zoomer Radio, our program sponsors. As a charitable organization, we are also we are grateful to our donors and all of our members, I see some of you here tonight, who make TIFF's year-round programming, educational, and community outreach initiatives possible. Finally, a special thanks to l'Institut National de l'Audiovisuel à Paris for making this project possible in the end. The list goes on. I'm going to try to be brief, but there are so many people who worked on this retrospective. Namely, I would like to thank my colleagues at the Cinematheque, Brad Dean, Amanda Brayson, Lydia Ogwang, Sam LaFrance, and Andrew Tracy, all of whom have put so much effort into this retrospective. I would also like to thank our colleagues at MoCA. I hope many of you saw Chantal's exhibition Now, which was featured earlier this spring at MoCA. And we wanted to append this retrospective to give more context to Chantal's work as both a filmmaker and an artist, because she was brilliant that way. Most of all, I am indebted to you, Claire Atherton, who is the co-curator of this retrospective, without whom this would not have been possible. But before I invite Claire on stage, I would like to signal the very distinguished presence of Sylviane Akerman. Chantal's sister is here with us tonight. She flew from Mexico to be with us, so thank you very much. And Christophe Lunis, who worked very closely with Chantal on the exhibitions, who flew here from Brussels. So we're very happy to have you here as we celebrate the extraordinary person and artist that Chantal was and her incomparable body of work. Now, I don't want to get too emotional, but I did know Chantal for quite a few years, and I was very lucky to host her here at TIFF, and I miss her greatly, in addition to knowing that there won't be more work from her, because this body of work, which ranges over 40 films in every genre imaginable, and I rewatched all of the work in preparing this retrospective, and I can't think of another body of work that includes structuralist experimental films, diary films that are super raw and intimate, but musicals and romantic comedies and documentaries, and she was just fearless. She tried it all. There were no boundaries for her. It was all just cinema. And in that way, that's where I really encourage you to see the rare films, because they all have that brilliance in her and all those insights. But she was just, experimental and radical and visionary. But for her, it was all art, and that work drove her forward and pushed her forward. And I have to say, in all my exchanges with her, she really encouraged me to look further. And I noticed in her, there was this generosity that was intense. So she kept you on your toes. She called you on certain things, but she also instilled in me this belief that I had to advocate for work that I really believe in. And I think that that's become just as important now as it ever has been, if not more. So just a word about Claire, because she is also extremely accomplished in her own right. Claire is an editor, and she worked with Chantal for over 30 years. She began her work with Chantal on Letters Home in 1986, and that fruitful relationship and friendship yielded 30 amazing projects. Quite recently, at the Locarno Film Festival, she was awarded a Vision Award for her work, both working with Chantal and other filmmakers. And I'd also like to mention another project, Un film dramatique by Éric Baudelaire, which we presented at TIFF this year, which just won the Marcel Duchamp Prize. And Claire was very much involved in that project. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Claire Atherton.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you for making this retrospective possible. It's very moving always for me to see so many people in the cinema room to see Chantal's films. It's just I can't say it to find the good words to say you how much I'm. It's a lot of emotion, and from my hotel room, I have a view on the poster with Chantal's name. So it's like I don't think that the hotel knew my link to Chantal. So I think it's again chance who, and that leads me to talk to you a little bit about how Chantal was working. I agree totally with what Andrea told you. Chantal was very much visionary. She didn't know much more. She didn't know more than you about anything. And that's very important for me to share with you, to share with people who either know her work or don't know her work, that there is nothing to know to see Chantal's films. Each film for her was like a discovery, like an experience, like the starting point of each film or each project was a very strong desire, an attraction to something, a curiosity, something she wanted to go and see more, to feel more. For each film, it was different. It was a different thought, a different attraction, but it was always an attraction and an attraction of the whole body. It was not an idea that she wanted to, something that she wanted to prove, or a demonstration she wanted to make, or even a denunciation or anything. She didn't want to judge anybody, but she just wanted to go and go as far as she could, as close as she could to what she was feeling, and make this go very close but keep a distance, so that tension is possible and the space is possible for everybody to receive her films. So as I was telling you, each film had a different starting point, but it was also always linked to something very, I was about to say very personal. I don't like very much this word personal, maybe very much intimate, very much involving the body. And for this News from Home, I like very much the title that Andrea proposed for this retrospective. News from Home is like, Sylviane, I think, likes it also. It's a title of Chantal, and it's also, it echoes also with her, Chantal's last, I like better to say latest, but it's also her last movie, No Home movie. News from Home or News from No Home, I don't know, but it's News from Chantal anyway. And for this film, the starting point was she left for the United States, for New York. She didn't really know why, but she left. It was like there was like a dream there, a myth maybe. She wanted to feel, and when she got there, she felt that it was not really the myth she thought. It was something different, a little bit of loneliness, a little bit of sadness. But but she liked the fact that she didn't really have to know where she was going. She would just live. She was just there to live and to feel and to experience this city and to feel the noise, to look at the colors, to smell, just to feel and to meet people. Also, she made very important encounters there, but that's not really part of the film. And also she knew that. She knew very quickly that she had to write a lot to her mother to explain what she was living, because her parents needed to have news. And so she wrote, and then she got some letters back. But it was just, she was living. She was, as I told you, she was feeling the city and living in it, and she was receiving those letters, and she didn't know that there would be a film. And she came back to Brussels, and then she went and for a few weeks, and then she thought she would leave again for the States. And when she left again, all of a sudden something was very evident in her that she wanted, and she had to make a film mixing those two materials, the letters and the images of New York. And that's the film, but it's the film. It's a story that went through her body and through her intimate feelings. It's not an idea of putting things together that will say such and such things. It's a need. It's a desire to experience this, and then the film begins to exist, and I think now it's not as it's the first film we show, but it's not Chantal's first film. Andrea and I decided to do a quite chronological order for the retrospective, but not really completely chronological. You know, we don't have to. It doesn't. Nothing has to be really always. How do you say? They have exceptions are important. I can put it like this way. And so there is this first film, which is News from Home, which is not the first film, and there is also Dest coming in 2 days, which is not in her first period, but which is the beginning of something. So I'm lost.
And we're showing a blockbuster tomorrow night.
And we are showing a blockbuster tomorrow night. But we'll talk about this tomorrow night. No, but I was about to go somewhere. You don't know.
News from home, letters.
Well,
the chronology.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, so no, I feel I don't know where I was going, because it's like Chantal. She never knew where she was going. I actually had written a few notes before coming, but I left the paper at the hotel, in front of the poster. You know, at the window, I think. No, seriously, I think this film, I didn't edit this film. I was very young at that time. It's a film. Yeah, I wanted to say the date. It's 1976. So it's not her first film. She had made the blockbuster 1 year before. She had made Je tue l'aile also. She had made her first film, Saute ma ville, which you'll see also. But I feel in this film that there is something which is in every film of Chantal, which is music. But particularly in this film, it's like if it's the essence, the essence of music without music, but it's music in itself. Music by the way it mixes the images, the rhythm of the mixing of the images makes music, and also the difference of the level of the sounds and the singing voice of Chantal reading the letters. Sometimes you'll hear that you don't really hear every word, because the words and the noise are fighting. And we were talking about this with Andrea just a few minutes ago. In some versions, when you have the subtitles, you can get it more. And in the version that you'll see there, it's the English spoken version spoken by Chantal. And so there is no subtitles. So sometimes you lose something, and you lose the signification of some words, but you gain the signification of an emptiness, of something that makes a space for you to put things in it. So it's Andrea was saying that the body of works is unfortunately finished, and we all know that, and we're all very sad about that. But at the same time, I feel it's not really finished, because each film provokes such huge history, and the history of each film is not finished, because each person who discovers a film of Chantal draws a new space and creates a new space of receiving it and of feeling it. So I think it's an infinite work, and that's why I'm so happy that you come so nombreux. So many. There are so many of you coming and discovering. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for listening to all those words before the film, and I'll be happy with Andrea to share your thoughts after the film. And as Chantal used to say, bonne projection.
And Claire, have you seen this version before?
Yeah, I've seen it in Basel, like 2 years ago.
And your impressions?
But each time I see the films, Chantal's films, it's a different experience. This time I was very impressed, maybe because it's in English and because we talked about it before, but by the different rhythm that it gives to the film. And I had the feeling that the voice was like, it's not a bass, it's aigu.
High.
It's high, yeah. It's high, but it seems to be like a continuous bass. Do you say that in English? And bass continuous. Yeah, it's like if it gives the rhythm to, you know what it is, a continuous bass in music? It's like if it. I had the impression that it's not. You feel the words even if you don't hear them well, and you don't hear every significance of each word, but you feel their signification, which is beyond what they mean. I don't know what you mean. If you see what I mean, I feel they give a rhythm, and they give a color, and they give this tone, even if you don't understand what they really mean in language meaning. I mean, you see, you hear mother, you hear love, you hear, and you feel at the same time a lot of sadness, and also something that makes you keeps to help you to walk also, like continuous bass that helps you to. Well, that's my impressions. Maybe not very clear, but maybe we can share our impressions.
I think there's also something in the abundance of the letters and the repetition of the words that come back.
Yeah.
And some of it has a slight, obviously, melancholy to it in a sense of absence, but there's also some humor there.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought also, of course, more than other times, I felt there was a lot of contrast with the sounds, of course, with the rhythm and with the movements and stillness, but also with the sadness and the humor. Sometimes you really want to laugh, and sometimes you're about to cry. So it's, everything is,
These contradictions and juxtapositions. And Sylviane, you have a starring role in this film. Also, I think it's very interesting that, she followed up Jeanne Dielman with this film, which is so different and so intimate. But yet this film is just as influential in a way, and it is continuously cited as one of the New York films because it's such a time capsule with all the graffiti that we see on the metro, which we don't see anymore, or the urban development, and also the fashion.
Yeah, the fashion and the way of walking, and the fact that there is no phone also, which is kind of striking. Yeah, and you don't hear one other voice than Chantal's voice, which is striking too. I don't know if I knew that, because you know when you don't know at the same time.
But I think the sound design is very interesting also, when she chose to elevate the sound of her own voice versus the field recordings.
Mm.
Are there questions or impressions? Yeah.
Thank you so much for showing this. I really am glad that we got to see this without the subtitles, because just sort of the architecture of the composition is so amazing. It just feels like these beautiful postcards. Everything's happening in this frame, and having words on the bottom would distract greatly from that. So thanks for this.
Also, you raise an interesting point, but the symmetry and her shooting frontally, you have the cars coming at you, or she's face to face with people, and there's a certain portraiture there. Did Chantal talk to you about that at all?
The fact that she was...
because this is recurring in a lot of her films also, a sense of perspective and symmetry.
Not directly, but what we call in French the frontalité.
Yeah, frontal, yeah.
Yeah. No, not really. She didn't. She never explained anything, so she didn't really talk directly about that, frontally about that. But it's like... For me, what I feel is that this frontality gives the space, and it doesn't direct the look. It doesn't explain you what to look, but it gives you to look, and so it creates a distance in which you can walk yourself and move yourself. It's like she's not going to push you to look in that direction, but she's going to give you the possibility of going and taking and putting back. Yeah.
Are there more questions or impressions? Yes, right here.
It was so wonderful to see the film. I saw it in the 80s, and it was actually, we organized the first Women's Film Festival in Montreal. And this was before DVDs, it was even before VHS. And we'd read about Chantal's work. We were so excited to see it. And I remember driving to the airport to pick up the diplomatic bags. And we had Jean Dillman as well. And it was only me. And I think there are 12 reels of Jean Dillman and several reels for this too. But it was thrilling to see back then. And it's really thrilling to see today. I mean, it's just so moving. I just wanted to think about a little bit more about the humor, because one thing that always strikes me about her work is the tenderness of her gaze. It's very loving. I mean, she's influenced by structuralism, but there's something so tender about it. And this relationship with her mother, which is so core to everything she does. And yet in this film, I always feel there's this mischievous, subversive turning away from the mother. So the mother, this litany, why don't you write? I write you, I send you money, and so-and-so's sick, and the banality of the letters. And then sometimes you lose the mother's voice. So she uses traffic, or she uses the soundscape to smother the mother, because in some ways it is smothering. And there's this kind of rhythm of distance and intimacy with the mother. So I always find that so fascinating in her work.
Yeah, but it's true what you say. But I don't. Yes, of course she was influenced by structuralism, but it's. I really feel, and I'm happy that you feel it too, that she has his tender gaze on things, and that's what I wanted to point out before the screening, is that she was really feeling and living cinema with her whole body. It was just. She was not a conceptual artist. as we say today. And even if her work is very well organized and everything is perfect and right and very precise and very it's radical in the sense that it's not when we thought of course I don't talk about this particular film because I didn't edit it, but when we were talking about editing, we were often saying that we wanted to be severe, sans concession, without making any concessions. That didn't come always right away, but at a certain point it had to be very severe and not letting you letting go to something which would be, as we would say, too much or too said or too so that makes the distance and that makes the preciseness of the constructions of the films. But the starting point of every of her works, documentary, fiction, films, installations, everything was always a strong desire and a loving gaze. And I'm not going to talk about Jeanne Dillman now, but Jeanne Dillman, the starting point of Jeanne Dillman was a loving gaze also on her mother, cooking and everything. It's not a denunciation about a woman close in her life. After it has also, because life is not simple, so why would cinema be simple? I mean, life is the reflection of cinema. I mean, so no, but so yeah, it's complex, and we used also very often this word complexity, not complication, but complexity. Everything is complex, and when you respect the complexity, so you can get to the simplicity, because it's very simple. I mean, if you have to describe this film in 3 words, you would say subway, streets, and voice, or mother, as you want. But I mean, it's not, it's like, it's simple, but it's complex. And that's also because there is this loving gaze, as you say, or a loving relationship, and also a relationship which is loving, but which is at the same time probably too much. So you have to escape, but you don't want to judge it. And it was like this in life. I mean, I don't want to talk about her relationship with her mother because it's not, but it was the same. Yeah, New York is the escape, of course. Yeah. And this, yeah, of course. You want to? Did you hear? Yeah. No, Sylviane said that New York is the escape of the love of the mother, of the is.
Also, the letter is like a call phone.
Yeah, and the letters are like phone calls now. Yeah, it's true that when. Yeah. Yeah, it's true that the phone calls that she had with her mother after were exactly the same kind of. I was only hearing Chantal's talking and not the mother, which is the contrary as to. But you can guess, and I was hearing.
And after the Skype.
Yeah, and
With
after
no
the
home
Skype
movie.
in the home movie, yeah. Evolution, yeah, it's the letters and yeah. But I remember, it's just a little story, but it's funny to tell. When we were editing La Captive, we were every morning going by car at the editing room. We edited it in 35 millimeters in Joinville-le-Pont, and we were going by car. And each morning she was getting in the car, and she was saying, either the sky is gray as a mouse, or the sky is blue tender. And then she would say, I have to call my mother. And then she would call her mother, and it would last like a little short letter like that. And she was saying, I'm busy, I'm going to work. And then she would hang the telephone, and she would tell me, can you stop? I have to buy some cigarettes. So it was always the same, is that structural realism? Maybe. But it's... No, but it's true. I'm joking, but at the same time, I think this structuralism and this structure and this rhythm is also very much linked to rituals and to, as she explains it sometimes, and she talks about it a little bit in the whole movie, and I felt it a lot. Is this ritual and this the rhythm of the words of the also of the prayers she used to hear when she was a kid. And this rhythm, it's yeah. That's why I think it's this film is really like it's the music by itself. I feel
She's talked about that actually. She mentioned it as a sort of tone poem or a prayer in the way that she read the letters. And it was very much about the musicality and the prayers that she had heard as a child. At least she said that at some point. Yeah. Are there more? Yes, right here. You?
I remember she responded to her mother. She didn't answer. Her mother said she didn't answer her in about 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Is that because the newness of New York? She answered her a few times, but the 3 week period and some long periods she didn't answer. She was overwhelmed by New York, and like you said, to get away from the familiarity of her home in Belgium or something.
Yeah. But what's your?
That's what I think. I think she was. Well, she liked the newness, or in the description of the movie, the mystique or the strangeness of New York. It was so different from her home, and she liked. Well, you said sometimes you don't want the family, you want to get rid of the mother, and I thought maybe that's why she didn't respond in 3 weeks.
I don't know.
She was busy making this movie.
Yeah. I have 2 other questions. Andrea, I heard the film critic this morning. He said he cribbed notes from you, saying the director of The Joker was inspired by this. Well, not inspired by the film. He used it for the 70s ambiance and backdrop, the fashion of the cars, the visual look for The Joker. He used his chief source was Chantal Akerman.
Well, that had nothing to do with me. However, that conversation did take place at TIFF. So when Todd Phillips was presenting The Joker, he had mentioned news from home, although I think he called it letters home, in saying that he had showed the film to his cast and crew because he wanted to immerse them in the sort of grittiness of New York in the 70s. And so I think that this film is a reference point for many people because it's a time capsule in so many ways. I don't know if you saw, there was an exhibition at Ryerson earlier this year by a photographer called Maura Davey. She's Canadian, but she lives in New York, and she's directly influenced by Chantal, and she shot a lot in the subways. And when I spoke to her about it, and she said that she was actually too nervous to bring a camera into the subway, and so she had to get someone else to do it because she couldn't confront people. And of course, everything has changed now with telephones and people putting things on Twitter, but there were no permits here, I don't think, so all of that has changed significantly. But for me, when I had just watched it again recently, I just couldn't believe all the graffiti, it's just the facades, all of that has changed so much, particularly Tribeca and the meatpacking industry. So I just think it's a reference point for 70s New York.
I love the 70s. Even in Montreal. Well, I went to New York in 1973 as a tween. But in Montreal and New York, it was the same. The buses were grotty and everything like that. One last question for you were the editor?
Yes, but not of this film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not really relevant, but to the subject matter. But this was shot in 1976. Did this occur before the Son of Sam murders, or after? Or if so, was she scared of?
I don't think we can answer that on Chantal's behalf.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Question over here, but thank you.
Not a question. I just want to make an observation. I was amazed at how interesting the film is, and considering how banal the subject matter is. It was shocking to me just how much it kept me through the whole thing. I didn't space out at all practically, and so. That's all.
I think Chantal also talked about that, about sustained viewing. And, I didn't know her obviously as well as you did, but we always talked about curiosity and how to look at images. And she was always drawn by something in the corner. There's something that caught her eye. And in watching this film again, I saw it twice this week, actually, and I saw things completely differently. There's a certain person who captures her gaze, or a pair of pants, or someone who's twirling, or the way the subway light. And so I think it's also about how you look at the world and the people around you. And I think that goes back to this tenderness in the gaze too, where people are returning her gaze and they seem very comfortable, right? They don't feel like they're being exploited. Nobody's really trying to get away from her. They're curious.
Yeah, they are like if they were making a choreography for her. Mm-hmm. It's like if they build her way of being there in front of people, and her way of being very much involved in the presence and what happens just right there when you are there, and how you make things possible to happen. So that's something very important in her way of filming and her way of experiencing places and meeting people. And it's just that she's receiving, and she's sensible. She said that once, a sensible plate. En français, c'est plutôt une éponge, une plaque sensible.
A sponge.
Sponge. Une plaque or a sponge. So yeah, well, and so that makes things happen. To just be there and be present to what's in front of you. And it's the same thing with South, with Dest, with many other films. And it's a way of making chance possible. And it's the same way we used to work in editing, very much building a space for things to happen.
I also think this is a great road movie in some sense. I mean, you talk about her always being in movement, and Chantal was always on the road and exploring things. There are so many cars in this film, great cars. It's like a great road movie. We have time for one more question or comment, if there are. Right here?
Yes, I found it very cinematic. I was struck by how cinematic it was. She placed the camera, and there was so much going on in there, and the wideness of the shots. And there was one when there were a few subway interior shots, but one where there's the people, there's the shifting of the cars, one shifting that way, the light coming in. That's the cinematographer too, but she's going to be here, Babette, on Wednesday, so maybe it's more of a question for then. But how much of these long takes? I know you didn't edit this film, but there's so many long takes. Like, would most of this be used and just a little bit be cut off at the beginning and end, or?
Yeah, I can't tell for this film.
But in general, you can't tell with this film.
No.
Yeah. But it's very.
But in general, she didn't shoot that much. So there are shots that we cut in shots. You don't put all the shots. That's obvious. But she didn't shoot hundreds of hours. That was shot in film also. So in film you don't shoot that much because. But it's true what you say. I really feel that in this film you feel very much what is cinema. It seems bizarre to say that, but there is something about. It's a film about cinema also. It's true. It's a film. It's a time capsule, as you say. But it's. I think it'll be different in 10 years and in 20 years, and it'll still be strong, and it'll still be tender, and it'll still be interesting, but in different ways. And it's because there is a game on colors, a game in contrast. So it's something organic which she works with.
And the grain is there too. I think in the restoration, like it looks like it was shot on 16 millimeter. This.
Yeah.
Just the grain is really the way it's maintained in this restoration. That's part of the feel, the retro, and the making it cinematic. It's just a very good restoration too.
Yeah.
I think we have to end there. We've run out of time, but I hope to see you during the course of the retrospective and this weekend because we're really glad to have Claire with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.